morning. I'm going to call to order this regular meeting of the Zoning and Planning Committee for Thursday, June 7th. My name is Jeremy Schrader, and I'm the chair of this committee. With me at the dais are council members Ellison, Reich, Gordon, and Goodman. Let the record reflect that we have a quorum. We have 3 items on today's agenda. Before we go into our public hearing, I'm going to move our consent agenda. The consent agenda is just one item today, approving an application submitted by Paul Halverson for the rezoning property located at 2535 Aldridge Avenue South from an R2B 2-family district to an R3 multifamily district to convert from a duplex to a fourplex. Is there any discussion on this item? Seeing none, I'm going to move this item. The motion is before us. All in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the motion carries. We'll move on to item 1, which is a public hearing regarding an amendment to the city's comprehensive plan to amend the future land use map for the properties located at 1000 North 3rd Street and 1001 Washington Avenue North to remove the industrial employment district and re-guide the sites from industrial to transitional industrial land use in order to allow for residential development. I'd like to let record reflect that we've been joined by the Council President Bender, and we'll begin with the staff presentation.
Good morning, committee members. Peter Crandall, Senior Planner with CPED Land Use. There are a couple applications before you this morning regarding a project at 1000 North 3rd Street. The first is a future land use map amendment. That's an amendment to the Minneapolis Comprehensive Plan, the current one adopted, for 1000 North 3rd Street and 1001 Washington Avenue North. So that's 2 properties in the North Loop neighborhood. They're reflected here on the existing future land use map. You'll notice that they're both guided for industrial uses and are located within the North Washington Jobs Park, which is an adopted industrial employment district in the Minneapolis Comprehensive Plan. Industrial employment districts are intended to reserve land for industrial uses, job-generating uses, offices, and in general, employment-related land uses. And as a result of that policy choice, residential uses are not allowed. The land use application to amend the future land use map would remove the industrial land use guidance and replace it with transitional industrial, which is a land use category that we use for industrial sites outside of industrial employment districts and allows for the possibility of different zoning classifications that may allow for residential development, including the industrial living overlay district, which is going to be the rezoning application that you'll be considering for the 1000 North 3rd Street site. This is the site that the related project will be located on. And this reflects the project site as it is located within that industrial employment district in the North Loop neighborhood. The North Loop Small Area Plan, which was adopted in 2010 by the City Council, also guides the site to remain as industrial land use, with the industrial employment district remaining on the site. This is a map reflecting where we currently have industrial employment districts adopted in the city of Minneapolis. As you can see, it's a relatively small portion of the land uses in the city. And then, of course, we are going through the update to the comprehensive plan for Minneapolis 2040. There's a current draft plan that's been released to the public. Long-range planning has chosen to keep the industrial land use guidance for this site in that current draft plan, which is was a main driver of staff's recommendation to deny the future land use map amendment. I won't get too far into the project, but I will say that at its meeting on May 7th of this year, notwithstanding staff's recommendation, the City Planning Commission approved the future land use map amendment, the rezoning application, and then several land use applications related to this development project. The development is a new 6-story mixed-use building with 129 dwelling units and 10,000 square feet of commercial space. Staff did recommend a number of conditions of approval for the City Planning Commission should they have approved the project, which they did. They adopted those conditions of approval and approved the project. So I will end my presentation there and take any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions from council members? All right, seeing none, thank you very much for the presentation. I'll open the public hearing. Would anyone like to speak? And if you could please state your name and address for the record.
Sure. Good morning, council members. My name is Amanda Jansen, and I work at Schaefer Richardson. We're located at 900 North 3rd Street.
Maureen Michalski with Schaefer Richardson as well.
Thank you for considering the comp plan amendment consideration. Just wanted to say a few quick items of why we applied for the comp plan amendment. The location of the site is in the industrial employment districts, but we've seen that the area has been transitioning into other uses. The sites currently that are there are not industrial, so there would not be preservation of industrial in the future. So there's currently this vacant Zuccara building, which would be the redevelopment site. There's also the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority headquarters. There is a charter school and a parking ramp. So just given the transition uses of the area and transitioning into this housing residential area, we think that housing would be a good use of the site. At the Planning Commission meeting on May 7th, we did show our commitment for housing and particularly 100% affordable housing. And we are still committed to that. So we're still committed to 104 affordable units at 60% area median income. We've also are working with the adjacent Minneapolis Public Housing Authority to work with them on project-based Section 8 vouchers, whereby residents would pay 30% of their income. So we want to reiterate that it would be the housing and particularly affordable housing.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from the committee? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else interested in speaking? Seeing none, I'm going to close the hearing and we'll now move on to discussion. Councilmember Reich?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sorry, can I just make one clarification?
Of course,
I should have mentioned this in my presentation, but I just want to make it explicitly clear that the future land use map amendment includes the Schaefer Richardson parcel as well as the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority parcel. They have given the applicant their permission to seek a future land use map amendment for their property as well, because they intend to redevelop that property in the future for residential uses. So just wanted to make that explicitly clear. Thanks.
Great, thanks. Councilmember Reich?
Thank you. I'm going to be speaking against the approval of this for pretty simple reasons. I think I'm on the record strongly trying to support preserving our workforce land use. And we created these planning sort of areas. You have to draw the line somewhere, otherwise there's no line. And here we have plenty of lines reinforced over several decades, or at least a decade of decision making. We created these industrial zones because they were shrinking and shrinking fast. And we did the analysis some 10 years ago that said that it's shrinking unabated. And even with those protections in mind, the areas where we're kind of soft on the transitional component, there's not been an increase in industrial in those areas. It's all been transitioning away. So these last sort of last stands, as you were, are the only areas where we've been able to protect this type of land use. It's reinforced in the old plan. It's reinforced in the community plan. It's reinforced in our proposed plan. This is the line. When you nibble away, it's death by 1,000 cuts. We will not be a working city. And so this has not been vetted in parallel with our housing staff. I do not believe that this is a legally binding commitment. I will actually refer to our legal staff. It's a great gesture, But in terms of its legality and binding document in terms of what the outcome would be, I would defer to our legal expert.
If we can get some advice from the council.
Sure. Mr. Chair, Councilman Reich, I assume you're referring to the commitments that have been expressed by the applicant on the record?
Correct.
No, you're correct. It's at this point today with a comprehensive plan amendment, which is a policy decision, and a rezoning, which is a legislative decision. The council has no ability to impose conditions on those decisions. The commitments expressed are just that. It's an expression of intent. Although they've stated it publicly and on the record that so the public is aware and the political sphere is aware, there's pressure to be brought to bear in that way, but you are correct that it is likely not legally binding, or at least you could not impose it via condition of approval.
Thank you. And I would further concur that with that, and also I would say we currently do not have the funding mechanisms to assure affordability. And unless this is going to be all out of pocket, I'm assuming that it would go through our processes of securing the funds to make sure the affordability would take place. Again, that has not been worked out in parallel with our housing staff as of today. So there's kind of an if, a big if, in terms of getting an outcome that we all, of course, want. We want affordable housing. We want great projects. We want to work with great developers, all of which is before us. But we're giving an if to a certainty. We are certainly basically saying our lines to protect workforce housing, current, reinforced, and even future, don't really mean that much. Because it'll be death by 1,000 cuts. Every zoning decision I've seen has been from a more intense use to a less intense use. Every single one, with one exception. There was one upzoning I-1 to I-2 for a furniture manufacturing plant. That was one. So, and if the body is thinking otherwise and concurring with the Planning Commission versus concurring with staff, I, of course, am concurring with staff. This should really put us on notice that our protections that we have contemplated in the current zoning document are not sufficient. Because if we can't even have one industrial zoning protection proposed, our transitional flexible stuff, which I applaud having in our proposed document, certainly with market forces as they are, will basically erode away as drafted. So it almost begs the question, what kind of protection we have for the more flexible spaces that we contemplate? Because we do really appreciate those flexible uses, but market dynamics as such, those will be wiped out for all residential, and even the areas that we've said will not be residential, well, they're going to get nibbled away as well. I think I've made my little sermon for the day. Mr. Chair, thanks for indulging me.
Well, we'll reserve the right to continue more if you need. Like, Councilmember Ellison?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a lot of respect for Councilmember Reich's position on this issue, and we've talked at length about it. And you know, while I disagree, I think that I'm going to approve this project. I want to move to approve this amendment. I think that several things went into my consideration as I was having this conversation. First, I think that the bar is pretty high for this project. We're talking about 30 years of affordability. We're talking about 100% affordable, and almost 20% of the units being project-based Section 8, which I think is pretty significant. And so the bar is pretty high. And while this isn't a legally binding document, I think that this developer has a reputation in the city. And I can't imagine that they would sit here at the stand and lie and not make good on this commitment and create an enemy of the city in the process. And so I think that you know, given that this wasn't a flippant decision, it was a long thought out decision. And through many conversations and seeing this development come up and reaching, I think, a pretty high bar, we do need housing in the city. You know, another thing that for my personal consideration is you know, in Ward 5 is that as we're seeing high-paying jobs in the North Loop, I honestly have my doubts about whether or not Northside residents would have access to those jobs. But I know that this kind of affordable housing at this level is something that Northsiders would have access to. And the fact that we're going to put this unit this building in the North Loop as opposed to putting it right in the middle of North Minneapolis, well, that's a part of our argument for not concentrating you know, our most vulnerable population in one area, right? So I think this is a good opportunity for that. And so I just want to voice that I'll be moving to approve this amendment.
Thank you. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I concur with Councilmember Ellison. I do agree with Councilmember Reich's point of view with regard to industrial, but I just want to add a little bit of context. So I represented this area for 10 years, and in that 10-year period, there was not any momentum for additional industrial uses at this location. In fact, what we've seen is quite the opposite. And I think it's important to preserve industrial uses, and there are some industrial uses actually in this area further to the east, right in the middle of some of the burgeoning high-end housing that's happening in this location. But the truth of the matter is public housing has this building. It's in a really hot location. I'm not sure that they should even be located here, and maybe they should be focusing on building a new public housing building in that location, and this would facilitate that. I will say that when no one wanted to work in this area, Schaefer Richardson was there. When no one believed in this neighborhood, Schaefer Richardson did. And I think they are a credible developer who has not ever had an issue with going back on their word with the city, which is unusual in this environment. And so I think that given that we're talking about a border location, which I understand why that's an issue for Councilmember Reich, but in this neighborhood, fighting for affordable housing is also a priority. And I don't believe that if over the past 20 years no one has used this for an industrial use, that preserving it will make it so. And so I think it makes sense at this time from where I sit, having represented this immediate area.
Thank you. Councilmember Gordon.
So I appreciate both sides of this quite a bit, and I commend Councilmember Reich for holding his ground on this. And we've talked about it in other areas, and I know that one of the industrial zones in my ward got nibbled away at when we put in the light rail station right by it. So I'm also sympathetic to Councilmember Ellison's position, and I do see this on the border. And I think I'll be supporting the rezoning. But what I wanted to use my time to say is maybe zoning it industrial isn't enough. Apparently there's massive market failure or there's some disconnect, because I've been part of a group of us who have held land for industrial for decades, and we haven't been able to attract something to come in there and provide the jobs. So we can think we're doing great because we have land to provide jobs, but then years and years go by when no jobs are actually being provided. Or sometimes it's something like storage, which must have the minimal amount of jobs. And I've also had a lot in my area that's been picked off for places of religious assembly and schools, which aren't quite the vision we usually think of when we're doing our employment zones. So I don't know what the answer is, but hopefully in our comp plan process and everything else, we're going to figure out how we can package some things. And I think we're heading in that direction as we're thinking about production and processing and other kinds of manufacturing that might make more sense. But so I just want to say that let's also dig in and look at where we've been holding the land and it hasn't been giving us the jobs we want, and see what it's going to take to help push the normal economy, the market, or whatever it is, to actually do that. And in the meantime, this might be a greater and better use for this, especially in light of the fact that it's providing affordable housing in what I think is really, by and large, a very expensive place for people to live.
All right, just looking for, I just want to add to that, I'm very supportive of this, but to be very clear, just to reiterate what I've said at the Planning Commission, like I'm more in line with Councilmember Reich that we need to preserve these areas, but we need to be mindful that there is a bar that we have. We need affordable housing throughout all parts of the city, just like we would need industrial access throughout all parts of the city to offer equal opportunity. And I think this project has done that with a proven developer. This isn't your first affordable housing project. So I think that these are the things that we look for. I'm happy to support this project. Councilmember Ellison.
Yeah, I'd like to, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move to approve this comprehensive plan amendment.
Thank you. If the clerk could call the roll.
Councilmember Bender. Aye. Ellison. Aye. Goodman. Aye. Gordon. Aye. Reich. Nay. Chair Schrader.
Aye.
There are 5 ayes, 1 nay.
Thank you. Fine. We'll move on to the last item, which is an application submitted by 1000 3rd and Bulk Storage to rezone the property located at 1000 North 3rd Street and to add to the Industrial Living Overlay District. This was contingent on the last item which you just approved, and so we have recommended the comp plan approval. I'll move the, approval of this application as well. Is there any discussion among council members? Councilmember Gordon?
Just curious if this would be a place we could stick some conditions on, give some reassurance? Because we heard earlier that we couldn't do it on the comp plan amendment, and I'm not sure if Councilmember Ellison has any in mind, but this might be an opportunity for us to do something.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Gordon, the rezoning is a legislative decision, so it's simply an up or down vote. There is no ability to attach conditions to a rezoning.
So were you moving the entire approvals or just
Yes.
rezoning?
No,
Wasn't
this
there
is
more? Is it just rezoning?
No, actually, if we have a little input from
I thought
staff.
there was a lot of stuff we're approving, and your motion maybe included the whole package.
So, Chair Schrader, Councilmember Gordon, the land use applications related to the specific development project were approved at the City Planning Commission. They were not appealed, and so therefore those are considered final. The applications before you today are just the future land use map amendment and the rezoning. So,
Okay, never mind.
Oh, my apologies, council member. I tried to move us along without staff presentation, but that helps clarify things quickly. But with that, I will move this application. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Clerk, that appears to have passed, and that is all we have before us today. With no further business, we are adjourned.